Good morning, everyone, or I don't know when you're watching this video. I know it's not ideal, and I wish I was there with you guys in our classroom, but this is what we have right now. Okay, so today I'm supposed to talk about comics distribution, and that is what I'm going to do. If you see me look down, it's because I have my laptop in front of me with my notes, so I won't forget anything. But let's start. Let's dive into the topic, or I don't know. So basically there are three different distribution methods, comics distribution methods used throughout the history of American comics. The first is basically the classical model. We don't really have another name for it. And then we have the direct market, which is one of the most interesting things about comics. It helped comics a lot and also withhold them a lot. And there is the digital distribution, which is the newest. So let's start with the classical model. Also, I have a handout and I have a PowerPoint presentation. Both I'm going to upload to the Drive and to the Facebook group. So it's gonna be super accessible for you guys. So the classical method. This is what happened from the very beginning of comics. Okay, and my cat is sleeping right next to me. So the classical model. Basically, this is the most simple. You have the comics publisher, you have the wholesale distributor, which also distributes magazines and newspapers and the like. And they distribute it to the sailors, which are newsstands and supermarkets, because in the beginning, in the 40s, the 50s, up to the 60s, comics were super accessible. They were at every newsstand and supermarket, magazine rack. So wherever you went, there were comics in the beginning. So basically what happens here is that the wholesale publisher buys the comics from the wholesale distributor buys the comics from the comic book publisher and then ships it all over the country. We are just talking about America at this point. Ships it all over the country, distributes it to the newsstands, to the supermarkets, and this is what happens. One of the most important things about it is the so-called returnability. This means that if there were some copies, hard copies of comics that didn't sell, they went back to the original publisher and they had to pay back the cost of that. So if a comic didn't sell, the publisher was what lost a lot of money, not the distributor or the newsstand or whatever. Of course, this model had its pros and cons. Basically, the one big pro is what I've already mentioned, that it was super accessible. It was everywhere. Anywhere you went, you saw comics. It was super easy to get into comics, to start reading comics, which of course was helped by the fact that most comic issues were just one story. There was not much of a continuity at this point. It wasn't like today that one story arc reaches over 4 or 5 or 6 issues. It was easy to get into because of the story and because comics were everywhere. But at the same time, it had a bunch of cons. For example, comics were secondary in the eyes of the distributor because magazines sold better. So basically what happened, that most comics were published in New York City and the distributor had to ship it all over the country. But they wouldn't ship just comics. They waited until they had a whole load of magazines and comics that filled up a plane and only shipped them then. This meant that a comic would take up to 2 weeks to reach the whole country. So it might have been that a story went on and you had a new issue in New York City, and in Los Angeles it would be still an issue back. Also, comics were not the same format as magazines, and the newsstands and the magazine racks were built for magazines. So comics were often damaged because they didn't have their own racks, basically. And also, as the sales plummeted in the 50s after the war, as we talked about how comics became less popular, especially superhero comics became less popular, the newsstand owners, they knew that comics weren't selling, so it wasn't their priority to sell them. They were just byproducts. So they put them on the lower racks, on the lower shelves, where it was harder to see them, to find them, which once again lowered the sales numbers. So basically, it was a self-aggravating process of comics losing their visibility slowly by the problems of the distribution system. And also another con that, once again, comics were just one product next to magazines and newspapers, and the sellers didn't really care about them. They didn't know their own product. So what happened basically, if you happen to go to a newsstand and you wanted to know, okay, what should I be reading? What would I like? Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Captain America? The seller wouldn't know. They couldn't help you. So that was one drawback as well. So basically that's the classical model, the classical method. And by the late 60s, the early 70s, comics were in a big trouble, basically. And that's when Phil Selig came into the picture with the idea of the direct market. Okay, I know that the article that you had to read talks about monopoly and lawsuits and stuff like that. I don't care about that. I'm not going to ask you about that in the test. What I want you to know that how the direct market works from distribution, from the point of view of the distribution, and its pros and cons. So, okay, so what is the direct market? Once again, we have Phil Selig, who is this distribution genius, business genius. I mean, it worked for him. And he saw that the classical method of comics distribution wasn't working. So he came up with an idea of a secondary, and it's very important, a secondary method of distribution. Direct market was invented to be a secondary method of distribution next to newsstands. And this was the problem you are going to see very soon. So basically, Selig went to the big companies, which is Marvel and DC at this point, with this idea that, okay, here I am, sell me your comics at the same rate you would sell them to wholesale distributors, which was, I think, 30% discount, something like that. And what I offer is non-returnability. So this means that from here on in, comics publishers are not responsible for the comics that didn't sell. Those copies stayed with Selig and his sub-distributors. Okay, so Selig bought these comics. He distributed them to comic book stores, hobby stores, specialty stores, because this is the point when comic book stores became a thing. And by now we know that comic book stores is a big deal. We know that from Hollywood movies and the like. Of course, we still don't really have comic book stores here in Hungary, not like in America. So yeah, the non-returnability. This is what's most important about this, the non-returnability. Once again, it had its pros and okay, and once again, it was thought to be a secondary method, and it grew super fast and it became super important and super popular. Basically, in a couple of years, direct market, once again, comic book publisher, comic book distributor, stores, comic book stores became the primary method of comic book distribution. It had its pros, it had its cons. Once again, the big pro for the publisher was the non-returnability, and that they didn't have to care anymore how to distribute their comics. It was actually a big problem for them. For example, okay, I don't have my books with me right now. I'm stuck in the countryside. My comic book books are in Budapest, so I can't check the dates. But in the 60s, the distributor that Marvel used, the wholesale distributor, went bankrupt overnight. Okay, she's just making noises in her sleep. Went down overnight, and Marvel had no means to distribute their comics. So they made a contract with the distributor that DC used, which was actually owned by DC, that DC would distribute Marvel comics as well, but there was a price to that. Namely, that according to their contract, Marvel could only publish 8 titles a month. Over the years, they expanded it to 12, but it was still a very low number. Just as a comparison, right now, Marvel publishes about 80 issues per month. DC, somewhat less, around 50. DC publishes less. But also, like, Marvel also have the Star Wars titles. Marvel publishes all the Star Wars comics as well. They have like 3 or 4 Star Wars titles every week. So yeah, the pros and cons. Pros, the non-returnability. I know, guys, I'm a little bit all over the place because I don't have you as a feedback system, so I'm sorry about that. So yeah, the pros, the non-returnability. Also, the whole comic book store culture that grew out of the direct market. Once again, it has the good sides and the bad sides. The good sides that, in contrast with the classical method, the owner of the comic book store actually knows their product. And if you go there, okay, this is who I am, what can you advise me to read, what can you recommend, they will be able to recommend you stuff. I actually visited a couple of comic book stores in Dublin when I was there last summer, and I was in Forbidden Planet. That wasn't that good, so I went. It's a huge store. It's not really about comics anymore. I would say it's more about figurines and collectibles. They didn't really have like a back issue collection. I'm going to talk about back issues in a moment. And I just went there, and the sellers didn't really care. You just went there and looked around, and nobody really cared what you were doing there. And then I went to, oh my god, Subcity. The name of the other store, it was Subcity. Subcity was actually a smaller one with a huge back issue collection, and I went there, and I was the first customer of the day. And the guy, he had a ridiculous Irish accent, and I could barely understand what he was saying, but in 2 minutes I was in a deep conversation with him about our favorite artists and favorite writers, what was coming out, what was new, and he really knew his stuff. And like, for example, I was talking about him, how hard it is in Hungary to get new issues, new copies, what limited possibilities we have. And he was already in a moment, he was like, okay, maybe I could ship my stuff to you. We can keep contact over the internet. You can tell me what are you ordering, and I can ship them to you. So this is how a comic book store can work, actually. Okay, so we have this whole comic book store culture once again, where the owner, the shopkeeper knows the stuff. The whole comic book store culture also meant that there was a completely new readership. On one hand, this new readership, this hardcore readership, meant that publishers could count on them being willing to pay more for comics, which meant that comics could be printed on better materials with better methods to create a more quality product. So this is the time when comics are in the beginnings of to be made to last, not just to be read once and put away, but to have and collect and put it away for decades, basically. The direct market also meant that comic book publishers could circumvent the Comics Code Authority. They still put the stamp, the seal of approval on the comics most of the time, but comics created for the direct market meant that they didn't have to obey to the code that much anymore. So in the 70s, in the 80s, more mature topics emerged. They talked about urban poverty, drug abuse. This is something that we are going to talk about in a couple of weeks when we talk about the different eras of comics. So I'm not going to go too deep into that. Also, once again, it's a comic book specialty store. So the racks were created in a way to accommodate comics. The distribution was built around comics, so it was faster. Once again, there was no 2-week long lag. You just went there and the comics were already there undamaged. So it was, because it was built for comics, it was so much better in that way. But once again, it had its drawbacks, namely that it was invented to be a secondary method and it became a primary method, which in the long run meant that comics basically disappeared from supermarkets and from newsstands. And if you wanted to buy comics, you had to go into a specialty store, which once again created this hardcore readership, which became very exclusive. It was hard to get into comics, which meant that comics went from the mainstream to be a subculture, a very closed off subculture, which was mostly, as the stereotype goes, white, heterosexual, older, so above 18, white, heterosexual, older, male. Comic book stores for generally became very masculine and kind of anti-woman places. This is why we have this stereotype that women don't read comics, because even before, comics were mostly made by men, and because of that, made with a male readership in mind. But when the direct market became the main force behind comics, it became even more anti-woman. I have a collection of essays. I don't know if no, you don't have to read from that. So it's a collection of essays written by female comic book creators and female comic book fans who talk about their experiences, sometimes about being a woman in the comic book fandom, sometimes about being a woman in a comic book store. And they talk about stuff, for example, that seeing comics right next to Playboys, or seeing men basically masturbating in comic book stores right in front of everybody. So in a way, while it helped comics not to go bankrupt, not to disappear, it also hurt comics a lot, because it created this very closed off, very exclusive, very masculine comic book culture. And it also helped to create the so-called collector culture. I already mentioned that this is the point when comics were made to last. And also the backbone of this collector culture is the non-returnability. I mentioned this back issue catalog. This is basically that, okay, there is this comic. I order, for example, 100 issues of this new title. I sell 80, so the rest I'm going to put it away and maybe sell them later on for a higher price to collectors. This is how it all started. And by now we have, of course, collector culture is not only comics, it's comic memorabilia, figurines and different home decor. Once again, I wanted to show you a bunch of stuff, but most of my stuff is stuck in Budapest. There is one thing that I can show you. Just a moment. Just an example of this collectible. I have this one, for example, here. So this is a best of Catwoman. It's actually a pretty high-end stuff. I have some Funkos here at home too, but for example, this is what you can buy in a comic book store. Figurines like that. I would say that this one actually was made with a male audience in mind, although she's not that sexualized. I mean, at least her uniform is all zipped up. But yeah, I have this one. It was actually a gift. And okay, where was I? So the collector culture. Next to these figurines, there are all kinds of ideas how to sell more comics, and one of the methods, and which is the most widespread right now, is the variant covers. Basically, whenever a new comic is coming out, you have the main cover and some variant covers. This can be that you have maybe 2 or 3 variant covers from an issue, and it can mean several dozen of different covers. Some of them are sold at the same price as the basic version of the comic. Some can cost even several $100s. I'm going to upload some pictures of comic book covers, variant covers, to the Facebook group, so you can see the different versions and different trends. Basically, you're going to see this in the handout as well. Some trends, so to say. For example, you have so-called virgin covers. A virgin cover is the one that has no text on it. You just have the picture itself, the cover picture. No title, no pricing, no barcodes. Sometimes they have the barcode, but basically the virgin cover is only have the picture on it. Then there are so-called blank covers. Then you only have the text and the cover itself is completely white. The point of it is that either you can draw on it or you can have artists draw on it. Comic book artists are actually very often found in comic book conventions, and you can commission them to draw for you. And by the way, they are on social media as well, and in my experience, you can actually have interactions with them. Most of the time they're super cool. I have written to a couple of them, usually just stuff like, oh my god, I saw that you're going to draw this comic and I'm so excited. That was actually Pere Perez. Yeah, that was Pere Perez, when I saw that he was going to be a guest artist for Valkyrie. And I saw on his Instagram and on his Tumblr that he was inking those pages, and I just wrote him a comment that, oh my god, I'm so excited. And he wrote back, he actually liked my comment and wrote back that, yeah, me too. So most of the time, artists and writers actually respond if you write to them, because most of the time they only have a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand followers. The most interaction I've had was with Kelly Thompson, who is a Marvel writer. She's writing Captain Marvel, Deadpool. She's going to write the new Black Widow, for example. I've actually talked with her a couple of times. She usually answers questions you asked her on Tumblr, and I had some personal conversations with her. Actually, okay, this is just an anecdote. So you might have seen on my Facebook that I crochet figurines, and I crocheted a character that she created. It was a so-called land shark. Basically, it was a shark with legs, which is super cute. It's a super cute character. His name is Jeff. So I crocheted that character and I put it on Tumblr, and I tagged her, and she come to my private messages that, oh my god, she shared my picture, and she came to me privately that, okay, this is so cool, I'm loving it, can I buy it? And I actually sold her that figurine. So my figurine is right now with the actual creator of the character. So yeah, if you want, you can actually go to these creators on Facebook and Instagram and Tumblr, and most likely they're going to reply you. Okay, so I was at the blanks. There are connecting variants. This means that, for example, when you have a limited series, a mini series, which is like 4 issues long, and then they are going to do a cover series that if you put them next to each other, they are going to give out a big picture. And there are the so-called lenticular covers, which is basically, so depending on how you hold the cover, there are 2 pictures, and depending what angle you're looking at, you're going to see a different picture. Marvel did this a couple of years ago. They did this series of lenticular covers where one of the pictures was a classic cover from the 80s, the 70s, and the other picture was the new version, like an homage to that cover. I actually have a couple of those in Budapest. Honestly, guys, if you have to do this for the rest of the semester, I hope we'll be able to meet in person at least once in this semester more, and then I'm going to bring you a bunch of my stuff just to show you. I have quite a collection right now. So I hope that we can meet and then I can show you some stuff. But yeah, so once again, variant covers, they can be up to several dozen for one issue when they expect that issue to sell really well, or it can be just one cover. For example, right now Wonder Woman is always published with 2 different covers, the main cover and the variant cover, but actually I think the numbers and the price are the same for both of them. And here comes a little task for you. This is something that I'm going to do for as long as we have to do these video lectures. It's a way for me to see that you actually watch my videos and go through them. What I'm asking you, each week I'm going to give you a little task embedded somewhere in the video. It might be in the beginning, might be in the middle, might be in the end of the video. And I want you to do this so I can see that you watched the video. So your task, your homework, if you will, for this week is to find a variant cover, any kind of cover, DC, Marvel, Image, any kind of American published cover, variant cover that you like, that speaks to you. So look up a cover that you like, look up who the artist is, what maybe what other stuff they have done, and post the picture of that cover as a comment to this video in the Facebook group. Write down the artist of the cover and why you like it. That's it. Okay, it's not that much. Okay, so I think we have exhausted. Oh no, the other part of collector culture, actually collecting comics that keep their value. There is a so-called grading system of comics which determine their worth, how well preserved the comic itself is. There is actually a link in the handout where you can check out the different grading levels, what they mean and how they determine the value of a comic. And also, when there is a comic for preservation as a collector item, they are often encased in these plastic cases. And it actually costs a pretty penny to have them encased in plastic and to be authenticated. Most of the time, these comics are usually autographed, signed by the artist, by the author, by Stan Lee. For example, right now, a well-preserved comic signed by Stan Lee costs about at least what I know of, 75,000 forints. And rare issues can go even higher than that. Anyway, so once the comic is within this plastic case, you can never read it again. This is actually just to be displayed in your home. Oh yeah, one more personal stuff. So about these variant issues, because I know it's a marketing ploy to buy more and more comics. It actually works for me. The most copies I have the same comic is actually 6. I have 6 different copies of the same comic. Actually, it's 4 different covers, and I have double issues of the original cover and 1 double of a variant cover. I have the 4 different covers on my wall in Budapest right now. I have a double issue of the original because the first copy that I got from a friend, it was damaged. There was a crease on the front cover, so I just couldn't display that. So I bought an extra issue, and I have a double copy of one of the variants because I bought it for myself, and at the same time my friend bought it for me, so that's why I have a double. Okay, sorry, I just had to pause a little bit because I had a message on my phone that the SD card just filled up. Anyway, so I'm just going to somehow edit these 2 videos together. So yeah, I think I've told you everything that you had to know about collector culture and the direct market. Once again, if you have any questions, please post them in the comments to this video. And we are going to do, this is very important, I'm going to be online at the time of the class on Moodle chat. I want to use Moodle chats, so if the department actually checks that we are doing something, we'll have some sign in official venues that we worked. So I'm going to be online tomorrow morning. I'm recording this at 11 a.m. on Sunday. I'm going to be online tomorrow morning at the time of the class on Moodle, waiting for your questions. So let's have a chat there. Okay, one more thing about direct market. It just, I don't know how many of you have seen Big Bang Theory, but Big Bang Theory is actually a pretty good indicator of how the comic book culture and the comic book store culture has been changing in the last 10 years or so. I'm not going to go into that. Let's talk about that. So think about, if you have seen Big Bang Theory, think about how the representation of Stuart's comic book store changed throughout the seasons. Yeah, by the way, bazinga. Okay, so let's go down to the last method, which is the digital. Marvel and DC both they have been experimenting with digital distribution for some time, but they really started to do on the same day, digital distribution in 2011. This means basically that at the same time when hard copies of comics reached the stands in comic book stores, at the same day you could buy them for the same price digitally. They also have, next to this digital pricing and digital selling, they have streaming services. Marvel has Marvel Unlimited, DC has DC Universe. They are of course based on a monthly fee or a yearly fee. I'm checking my notes. So Marvel costs $9.99 per month, or $69 or $99 a year. If you pay $99, you actually get like a gift package with limited edition comics, an action figure, pins, stuff like that. It always changes in a couple of months. DC Universe costs $7.99 per month, or $74.99 per year. The difference between the two, that of course if you subscribe you get access to a digital library of comics and you can read as many as you want. There is no limit. For Marvel, new comics are added to this library about 6 months after initial publication. For DC it takes a little bit longer. As I could see, it can take up to maybe a year to be added, a new issue to be added to this library. But at the same time, DC Universe actually offers older animated series, the old Batman movies. So if you subscribe to DC Unlimited, you can actually watch movies and series as well. So that's basically the difference between the two. Once again, the digital distribution has its pros and cons as well. The pros is that it's super fast. So once again, come the day of publication, you just go online, you buy it, and you already own it. And it's a wide access. Once again, comic book stores can be pretty unwelcoming to women, to maybe queer people, people of color. But online, you just go there, you buy it, it's easy access, it's wide access. No worries about that. So what digital distribution does basically is that we had this very narrow market that was created by the direct market, and the digital distribution just widens it. That's why that and the superhero blockbuster, why the comics are slowly seeping back into the mainstream and stops being a subculture. And actually we have no hard data but anecdotal evidence, but it seems like, because comic book publishers don't publish their sales numbers for digital, we don't know exactly how many digital copies are actually sold. But it seems like, based on anecdotal evidence, that more women are buying comics digitally. It seems like that when we see like top 10 sales, it's usually female-led titles that make the best-selling lists digitally. And also the cons, I've been thinking about the cons of digital distribution, basically that you have no hard copy and it's easy to pirate. So basically on the day of publication, the comics are already on pirating sites, which is a con for the publishers, of course. There are also other possibilities that are becoming more and more popular these days, beyond the digital distribution, and these are the so-called trade paperback editions. These are basically collected editions of comics. They collect 4 to 6 issues per collection. They are a little bit cheaper than buying the singular issues one by one, and they are sold not just in comic book stores but digitally in digital bookstores and in actual bookstores. So it's actually another way of avoiding the comic book stores. So this is another method that helps to widen the market. I actually have paperback editions here, so just wait a moment. I am back, and yeah, I told you guys that you might see my cat. Say hello. Okay, she might stay in my lap. No, she is going down. Anyway, so this is how basically a trade paperback edition looks like. So this one collects 5 issues and also has a little extra story in the back and some extra material. They usually have some extra material. Here in this case it's like how a panel came to be, so you can see the pencils, flat colors, some shading, and the final product. And also before that there are some character sketches. So once again, this has 5 issues, some extra material, and it cost $16 when I bought it in 2015, I guess. This is another one. So this is a full series of 12 issues in 2 collections. It collects 6 issues per collection. This cost a little bit more. It was $18 each. Actually, I bought it used, so I bought the 2 of them for 6,000 forints. So that was a little bit cheaper, actually, for me at least. I think they don't know, they do have some extra material. So plans for basically storyboards of the story, stuff like that, character designs. So yeah, this is what happens. Sometimes they do hardcover, so this is a hardcover one. It collects five issues, from plus of course some extra material, once again storyboards and inked pages, character designs, and this was $25 when I bought it. There are also so-called omnibus editions. I actually don't have an omnibus. They are like encyclopedia size comic book collections. They can cost over $100. What I have instead is this. This is a Hungarian edition of Captain Marvel. It collects 13 issues altogether, so it's a little bit bigger and more hefty, even in weight. This is how comics, most of the time, comic book collections are published in Hungary, especially by Fumax. they do these bigger collections with up to 10, 12 issues. They have published so from Marvel, they have published Captain Marvel, they are publishing Deadpool, Thor, Loki. It's worth checking. Okay, I'm not getting paid by Fumax, but it's worth checking out their comics. They are good guys. So Fumax, if you see this, remember please that I am advertising your product. Okay, so basically that's it for us this week. I want to say thank you for watching, guys, even though I know that you had to watch it. Once again, if you have any questions, post them in the comments, but I'm going to be online live tomorrow morning for you to ask questions and for us to have a little chat about everything. Please stay safe, stay healthy. If you have any questions, come to me. And I hope that we'll be able to meet in person in this semester. But that's it. Don't forget your little homework, and see you when I see you. Goodbye, guys.